Garrett Gunderson. Thank you so much for being here today, sir.
So Brian, how you doing, man?
I want to start with what was one concept, one idea, something that's had the biggest tangible impact on your life.
You know what really has is writing. Like just doing a lot of writing. Like I write a blog every week now, and it's like the one I did today was only like 1,800 words, but most of them are like 2,500 to 3,000 words, and it helps me like really learn the lessons because I think all the way through it. And so some mornings, like if I wake up and I'm not just feeling like 100% or like something's on my mind and bothering me, I'll just take time to like write for myself, just like write about it and what the emotions are, and it helps me like process it and learn from it. So just that whole concept of writing has been so instrumental in like growing.
Yeah, that clarity of thought that comes with just writing ideas in our head. It's so funny how like we think we have this clear idea when it's just uh in our brain, but then when you put it on paper, you realize like it's such a more incomplete thought. It has so many more holes than you initially thought. Like it's so beneficial to just sit down and really write through things.
That's also like helpful when I'm on stage, just my recall, my ability to articulate a concept, my ability to make something more simple that might have started out complex by just writing, right?
Yeah, I noticed that today. I was re-listening to your episode with Ben Greenfield, and I was just so like when it comes to money in particular and accounting and tax stuff, all this world it gets so complicated so quickly. And I was so impressed by just the ability to explain these ideas in just like a compact, understandable, digestible way. It was impressive.
Thanks, man. Yeah, appreciate that.
So, if which book do you think that? So, my audience tends to be younger people in their 20s. What do you think of your work? What is the one book that you think that demographic should particularly have their hands on?
I think my like newest book, Money Unmasked, because it's like helpful to understand your money persona, and it's helpful to understand like how can you profit from your ideas up front without having to borrow money and leverage the cycle of creation is really helpful. Like it's written in a more interesting way than some of my other books that feel a little bit more academic. And so like Killing Sacred Cows is a book that if someone's never lost money or invested, they're only going to get half of the value of that book. But if you even if you've never invested money or you're just starting because you're young, like Money Unmasked is going to be super helpful and doesn't require you to already have a certain amount of experience.
I'm curious about those four money personas that you talk about. Uh, it's interesting trying to piece that out for yourself, where you fit there, and also just that understanding of that additional awareness into how you traditionally are as a spender, as a saver. It's a fascinating topic to see how we relate to the world in that way.
And then like the money personas are kind of these unconscious belief systems that often happen from the time we're young through experience, through circumstance, through environment, through how our family operates and whether we choose to operate like them or do everything to operate different than them, through our concerns and frustrations. There's like all these different factors that start to develop how we operate around money, and often it's a blind spot for people. They just have certain belief systems and they don't know where they come from, and they often get into scarcity and isolation to deal with them, which can actually prolong the problem. But if you understand your money persona, you realize there's a shadow side that's kind of that isolated side and that scarcity side, and then there's also a winning persona, which is more about co-creation, collaboration, more about value and service and solving problems and expansion. But if you don't understand what the trappings are or the triggers, it's easy to get caught in the shadow persona versus embrace that winning persona. And so, when I didn't really know what my money persona was, like I grew up a miser. That's the shadow persona, because I just learned from my family. Hey, you never know if you're going to have enough money. You've got to hold on to everything that you've got. Every way you could do to save is going to be money in your pocket. A penny saved is a penny earned type of philosophy, and that's what I was trained. That's what I was taught. That's what I was educated on. And there's a winning side of that, which is the mindful manager. Like I've had people that take their skill sets. There's this one person when I was doing interviews while I was writing the book that they would go in to like big casinos and they would show them where they were inefficient with their money based upon how they ran everything, and their average savings for that company was like 800 grand. So it was substantial. But if all their energy was on how they could budget themselves and not take that value somewhere else, they have a very finite, income that's coming in versus someone that's and what they do is by adding more value to these other places, they end up making more themselves. And so there's another guy that became my client back in 2005, and he was an engineer, and he was really like all about. He was such a miser, like he never spent any money. I read about him in the book, like even during Christmas, it was all like just spending $1 per kid at Goodwill. Like it was just everything was about reduction and scrimping and sacrificing, and it was suffocating. Like didn't go on vacations. He has this thing he talks about where he ate peanut butter and Miracle Whip sandwiches. I'm like, why Miracle Whip? He goes, because jam was a luxury, right? Because
Mm.
they could get a big tub of Miracle Whip at Costco that was a lot less expensive than jam, so it would go further, even though it didn't taste good. And so ultimately, he figured out like, wait, there's a process called cash flow optimization that he discovered because of the way his brain worked, and he started bringing that to me and showing me that so I could take to my clients. And now, he saved, like right now, every single month there's tens of millions of dollars attributed to that process that he's brought to the world. And now that he's operating his mindful manager way, he's made 10 times more than he was an engineer on a fixed income. And he's taken vacations. Actually, unfortunately, he took a vacation to Israel, and the second day he was there is when the whole war broke out. So, but ultimately, he's just a different person because his mindset is on value creation, on service, on solving problems, not just on what he can transactionally do to budget, reduce, and coupon clip and all this kind of stuff that's very myopic. So that's the benefit of understanding your money persona. Is it's not that they're positive or negative, it's that there's a shadow and a winning side. So if it's like, oh, I'm a miser, that's negative. Well, that's just your shadow persona. But the winning side of that is you're detail oriented, you're efficient, you're great at improving things. You're going to be able to find ways to reduce waste and create that efficiency, right? So like as we embrace that, then all of a sudden we can celebrate it and we can actually make more money by creating more value in the marketplace.
Mm. And so much of that relates to like this abundance mindset, the scarcity mindset, how we relate to those two. What have you learned about those two opposing sides? It's an interesting conversation. I've been trying to think through it because I have a friend who is a content creator, was an engineer, quit his engineering job after like 6 months, and he went all in on content creation, moved to um, moved to like Southeast Asia and was doing this, and that, and living a life, trying to live a life out of abundance, like a very acute awareness of this scarcity mindset that he was programming and trying to overwrite it. But because he was a content creator and because he was still in like the early stages of it, that income coming in was infrequent,
Yeah.
and um it like to me it seemed crazy because the money wasn't there at the time to be able to do all these things. um so I've been trying to pierce through how you can relate properly to that abundance mindset without going into too far of the extreme, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, like we've got to be mindful, but there's a certain level of providing the basics in order to be able to live. And there are a lot of stories of reckless entrepreneurs that are the one in 1,000 that make it, that were living on someone's couch and risking everything. And there's a lot of gambling to that. What we don't hear a lot of times is the stories of the people who didn't make it. So I think it's important to be stewards over what we have and say, I have a friend, Rich Christensen, wrote a book, Zigzag Principle. He's like, hey, you can have this amazing vision, but you zigzag your way there. And the first zig is create cash flow. So if that means that you have to have a temporary job in order to create enough cash flow to support what you're up to, so that you're not inviting so much scarcity because you're going deep into debt and not having an income come in, that's just being wise. Now, on the other hand, if it's always one day I'm going to start doing that and I'm just going to keep working and I got to build up enough, and then all of a sudden just years and years go by and we miss that boat. So there's a sweet spot where you figure out like where can you dedicate and allocate your time so that you're taking care of the basics and finding time to create what you want to create. So I get it because I sold my company a couple of years ago, and I tried to just, it's like, okay, whatever money came from that, I'm not wanting to live off of that, right? So I got a chance to feel what it was like to kind of start over a little bit, right? Sold my database, all that kind of stuff. Now I had certain assets like YouTube and stuff, but like all of a sudden I start to feel what it's like if I want to just write, but it's going to take a year for that to come out in a book versus, do a consulting gig or something like that. So I get that there's kind of like you got to figure out what your flow is. You've got to carve out certain time so that you kind of earn that space so that like I know that some people can make it earning nothing for long periods of time and then it explodes, but I don't like that startup mentality.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that they do a startup company, they're sleeping on the floor, they're neglecting their health, and they're just hoping to sell it one day. I'm more of a why not create cash flow along the way responsibly, and then sure reinvest some of that and potentially grow that. But a lot of these people want hyper growth, or they want to go from zero to exponential far too fast. So it's about designing your rules, designing the game worth playing, taking care of the basics, and part of taking care of the basics might mean that you don't have an extravagant lifestyle. You don't have everything that you want, but you're doing the work that you want. You're doing the
Yep.
things that matter to you. So what is that allocation? Is it 50-50? You do some of those things.
I love the intentionality behind the lifestyle design, because there's so few people that actually just sit down and say like, what do I want in life? It's such a good guiding principle once you have that patterned out and be like, okay, this is what I want, this is what I'm aiming towards. It provides such a better way of um, interacting with the world today, because you know the direction you want to head in.
Right? Most people, it kind of becomes a default. I mean, especially in today's world where people are going to school, getting a student loan, coming out, not doing what they went to school for, or not getting what the school promised them they would get as far as an income. So now they have this feeling of like, oh, I'm already starting below zero because I've got this loan that I have to pay. And so they go get a job in something they don't love to do, they don't want to do, hoping that it'll be temporary. And then all of a sudden, time slips away. So when we trade our time for money, and we're not intentional about the life that we want, we go to that default that gets sucked into, hourly, that gets sucked into, oh, this has a good wage and benefits. And the problem is, if we're doing it for that stability and security at the expense of expression and freedom, then we're going to end up unhappy. We're going to end up with an energy drain. We're going to end up in a place where we don't have the same zeal for life. And that passion starts to diminish. And then we do what we have to do instead of what we get to do. And I think it takes a lot of energy, effort, and intention to discover the life that we want to live and to design it that way because the dream job might not exist. Maybe you have to be entrepreneurial and invent something,
Yeah.
you know? Um, I think that there's far too much time dedicated to memorizing and passing tests and not enough time dedicated to discovery of ourselves, right? So everything from emotional intelligence to financial intelligence to the savvy of proper communication skills, sales, marketing, fulfillment. Like these are the things that aren't often taught in a classroom, but they're taught in the classroom of life. But if we don't learn them because we're doing things that we hate, when we finish doing the thing we hate in the name of a paycheck, we don't have the same energy when that day's over because we're exhausted because we gave too much of ourselves in sacrifice. And I think this is one of the notions that's problematic in the world is people think we have to sacrifice to succeed, but sacrifice often is the very thing that impedes our progress and decimates our success. Because what if you do something that you hate and it pays you? Okay, like, are you more successful? I don't know. How did you feel about the process to get there? I don't
Mm.
believe the ends justify the means. I think the means are where we win, is if we choose the means that are meaningful to us and the win is in the work and we enjoy the process along the way. It doesn't mean that we're just going to get to do everything we want all the time. We're going to do things that are difficult, that we have to discover, that we eventually have to be profitable enough to delegate. And there is a path that gets us there. But I look at that as like all the ingredients to figure out what we want to do and what we don't want to do. All the ingredients to discover, like, yeah, I'm not going to do that in the future, but this is what really lights me up. But most people, unfortunately, as time goes on, become bitter and stop looking for that. They
Mm.
think it's too far out of reach. They don't think it's possible. They go, oh, well, I have a spouse now. I got to take, I got to earn money. I've got kids. I got to take care of them. They got to go. And like, so a lot of people, especially in earlier generations, live their life for someone else. They did these jobs for the pensions and the benefits. And guess what? A lot of those pensions went bankrupt. A lot of those benefits got cut over time. So here they are losing the skills that matter most because they're trapped in a job they don't love instead of investing in themselves, growing their value, understanding how to serve others and solve problems. And this is where we are stuck today. I mean, I think that there's a lot of people that are willing to do things that don't make sense in the name of a paycheck. As a matter of fact, a lot of people turn a blind eye to the impact of what they do, that it's maybe not the best thing, but it's necessary for them in their mind to earn money. So, like, just think of all the crazy things that go on in this world. And you're like, who are the people that are executing this? Who are the people that are doing that work? People that feel it's their only option or feel like and they just don't even try to discover, what's actually happening. And I mean, that's probably a bigger conversation, but it's one of the issues that I think is why we're not in a better place right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's so fascinating. It reminds me of that quote from Jim Carrey talking about how his dad could have been a great stand-up comedian, but he thought that the safe route was to become an accountant, and then he became an accountant and got fired as an accountant. And then the quote from Jim Carrey is something along the lines of, "You could fail living someone else's life, so might as well fail trying to live your own life."
Yeah.
I, it's perfect. It beautifully illustrates that point of like, yeah, there's just we gotta get intentional about what we want.
When the younger generation, like, Jim Carrey's father was in a generation which was more likely to get that job that's like, oh, if I go get this job that gives benefits and a retirement
Mm-hmm.
plan. And they were more likely to believe that because, 50 years ago, people were like, oh, if you work hard and get good grades and get a degree, you're set. But now we've seen that that's not quite how it works. There's
Yeah.
so many companies going, don't really care whether you have a degree or not. I care whether your abilities are and whether you can provide value. So that narrative has massively changed. So hopefully people are more willing to take a leap of faith on themselves, but there's also kind of a notion that's growing where people feel because it is easier in at least in America today to make a living than it was 50 years ago. Technology's advanced. There's just so much more available and accessible. If you look at the wealth of today versus the wealth of 50 years ago, it's been exponential, right? Even though there's inflation, even though it costs a lot more, but people are earning so much more and they're able to accomplish so much more because of we're building on other people's ideas, because there's
Mm.
efficiency, because there's collaboration in a way that wasn't existing before, because it's so easy to travel or just do a Zoom or whatever it might be, right? We just continually find ways to produce in a more effective manner.
Yeah, and skills are just so much more easy to learn now, like by
Dude,
yourself.
what my kids learn on YouTube, right? Like my son just makes music in Ableton and he taught himself by YouTube, right? And
It's
it's like
amazing.
8 layers of a song that he's figured out. He's got his piano there. So, I mean, you know, I'm not very handy, but because of technology, I've become so much more handy. I could just
Yeah.
look something up and figure it out, where before reading an instructions was impossible, right? So it's there's so many examples of that.
Have you have you thought a lot about like AI and how that's going to change the landscape of things, and kind of we're seeing this more exponential increase in technology and how it relates to people earning money. It's like it's a very interesting conversation when you think about like what work will look like in even like 10 years from now. It's
Yeah,
crazy.
I mean, in my world, I look at it like what AI could bring is to remove all of the things that I don't even love doing that require
Yes.
so much effort and labor that, in my financial world, like getting people's financial house in order. There's a lot of details that I think that AI could start to really become more efficient, making sure that content is relevant and timely. AI could really bring that. So, what AI could do is allow me to get to a place where I could be really connected with the person I'm with. Like, I don't have to spend time in all the busyness and details. We could talk about the things that really matter to them and get to the place of like, what do you really want your life to look like? What's most important to you? What holds you back? Like, get to those places of intimacy that people almost never get to because we're so frenetically trying to handle so much. So I'm hoping AI will just remove all that, make it so much more efficient. And at the same time, like, I have no idea what AI is gonna mean with the level of disruption. and what that's going to mean for people feeling relevant and having a job and what they do and what AI will be able to replace and not replace. Like, I don't think humans have ever been very good at predicting those types of things, right?
Yeah.
Like, humans thought that by this time we'd be just flying around in saucers, and when you think about all the cartoons and the Back to the Future, all that kind of stuff, that hasn't really happened. So in some
Totally.
ways we're really slow, in other ways we're fast. But I think that there's going to be, it's like anything, disruption's going to make it positive in some ways and negative in others. And the people that are more holding on to wishing things wouldn't change will be in more pain than the people that adapt and grow and find ways that they can actually add value in new and meaningful ways, knowing that the things that were less exciting and not as efficient could be removed from their plate.
I think it's such a great point. I mean, I'm already seeing it with the podcast. Like I started this thing um coming on like 2 years now, so probably like a year and 8 months. And from the time that I started to now, the amount of busy work I've been able to just pass off because of technology and because of AI, it's like it's made me be able to have so much of a more focus on just the conversation, just because of now we have editing tools and this, that, and the other. It's like
Yep.
fine, I can focus on the thing, like the reason why I'm actually doing this thing. It's definitely the beauty of it, and I love the possibility of like of being able to start like a big company with like three guys just because you're able to leverage technology so well. It's like it's a very cool possibility. Don't know what the unintended consequences will be, but
Right.
it's cool.
Yeah. I mean, we'll see. It's gonna be a wild ride.
Absolutely. I know meditation's a big part of your journey.
Yeah.
I've only briefly heard you mention it, and I think you have such a fascinating story. Um, I would love to kind of hear a little bit about your own journey to what you're doing now, and then how meditation kind of has fit into that picture.
Well, meditation is something that I learned like 20 years ago, but struggled with. Like, I remember the first time I tried to meditate, I went in the basement of my house and didn't even make it 60 seconds. I heard something, I was like, oh, and it's like so easily distracted. I mean, this morning I meditated for, I think it was like 35 minutes. So it wasn't like a really long meditation. Some mornings I'll go longer, like an hour and a half, maybe,
Nice.
um, it's just, but then what it does is it helps me to get really clear about like what's going on, like what my emotions are, what, it's, I have a process where I'm basically doing, I'm meditating and I have these names that I chant essentially in the meditation. And then when I get distracted because the mind gets busy, then I'm just trying to let that pass by and give that up and then reset and hopefully be more present over time. I mean, my wife meditates for 2.5 hours a day. I mean, it's pretty amazing. I think if they took scans of her brain 15 years ago when she started and today, it would look different because of what happens in a brain that does that. She's a calmer person. She's more powerful in her ability to, not only listen, but give advice and handle situations that might have been overwhelming for her in the past. And it's even changed like her overall energy and how she shows up. And so it's something that I like to start my day with. I'm not as consistent as I would like to be with it, but the more consistent I am, the better my life tends to get.
Hmm. That's such a fascinating point. The more consistent you are with it, the better life tends to get. It's one of those hard things though to stay consistent with because it's not like abundantly clear off the bat like what you're getting out of it. Like you don't get that same dopamine hit as you would from other things.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it, part of the goal is not getting anything, just getting to a
Yeah,
place of,
exactly.
the void where there's a blank slate for potential creation, or just, we're in a world that's noisy. There's always noise in the background. There's TVs, there's podcasts, there's just always something happening. There's meetings. It's like, I don't think people often get enough time to think for themselves, to think to themselves, to like really ponder because there's so much being told versus being discovered on our own. I used to have a buddy come over and we work out every morning. Then we'd have coffee right after. And then when he moved away, actually he was like, oh, I don't have a lot of time to myself. And so that became a big part of my morning routine and my meditation practice in the last couple of years. I've had a lot more time on my own to really like, ponder like what do I want my life to look like? what's the game worth playing? How do I design that game? What things do I want to do more of? What things do I want to do less of? What emotions haven't I processed? What thinking do I have that's sabotaging, or where do I find myself in scarcity? Like just having time to think about those things. And I think that that's really helped me design this life I really enjoy, that I never want to retire from, is is having that time to myself.
Phew. I mean, it's an interesting part of like when you were in Italy and you did that stint there as well. It's like you took off some time, and I'll let you explain it, but you took off some time from work and kind of just lived life. And in doing that, and in giving yourself the freedom to just be, like, you're able to become more of a renaissance man and get into X, Y, and Z, and just like become this more like complete individual. Like I love those little, I think the way you described it is like mini retirements, like month
Yeah.
here, month there. It's a cool way to do things.
And don't wait till you're 65 or too old.
Yeah.
Like, take some time along the way. It was hard for me to like take a summer when I owned a business and be like, I'm going to go to Italy. It was hard to set that up. It took some time, but it was worth it. And then I'm there. It was awesome. But there were times I was bored. I mean, it's slower there. But that boredom created that thinking that led to like, what do I want to do? It's like I don't really. I lost some of my hobbies. So I'm like, when I get home, I want to play guitar again. I want to maybe I'm gonna learn to shoot a bow. Maybe learn to fly fish. Maybe and then I started drinking coffee while I was there. So I was like, I got to learn how to make good coffee when I get back. And so I went and took a class at Intelligentsia. So I found that there was value in leisure, and that when I started to have hobbies, I started to have time to like think and download and experience things that were just for me. That if I didn't have that time, I would have never had those thoughts or those ideas. So it became a catalyst for brainstorming and for creation. And when I've came back since I've come back from Italy, I've just done so much more writing. I've created so much more content because I came back with a fresh perspective and a lot of lessons, and seeing what quality of life could look like, and seeing what enjoying life along the way feels like, and knowing what boredom feels like. Boredom isn't the worst thing. Like, people are rarely bored. There's always something going on. Someone's scrolling something. I mean, it might be a little bit boring while they're doing it, but like, again, how much time do we have with just time to think?
Yep.
I mean, I've never really had on a podcast talked about it at this level or said it this much, but, I do think that in my book, Money Unmasked, I talk about hobbies being this access and this gateway to remembering what we're here for, remembering who we are, remembering what we want. And I say remembering because I think it's there, but it gets kind of like forgotten over time through, circumstance and environment, through phases of life. When we're kids, we're playful, we're imaginative, and then as we get older, it's like, well, that's kid stuff, and then we lose a lot of that excitement. But that
Mm.
excitement can be a fuel for something, and I do think there's a distinction between hobby and career, and hobby and earning money, and maybe sometimes those may cross over, but I do think that if we can blur the lines between work and play, then we're not looking for this concept of retirement. But again, if we go back to Jim Carrey's father, he worked at a time where retirement was a big deal because think about, in the 1950s, there are people still working in assembly lines, and there are factory workers that now robots handle all that. So that's one way that we've already seen AI or technology improve our lives, is that we're not doing as many dangerous things. Not as many people are having to die in their work or work 7 days a week doing the same thing that's mundane over and over. So we're in this like era right now where if we go back 100 years, it would seem foolish to talk about purpose. It would seem crazy to talk about, living your quality of life along the way. It was like people were just trying to make it in most places. And there's still
True.
those places on earth today where there's plenty of poverty, and there's plenty of like people struggling to get by. And there's plenty of people, even where we're at right now, struggling to get by. But there's an abundance of people that have an unprecedented opportunity to say, how do you want your life to look? What do you want to do? How do you want to create value? You can invent it. There's technology. What used to be expensive is now free, and you can use that as a platform to build upon. And if you could do that to help other people, you can get paid for that. What an amazing concept in time.
There's a quote from Naval that he says that all the best investors spend most of their time walking and reading. Is it for that exact reason of just like when you are bored, when you're walking, when you're reading, when you're taking that time in leisure allows you to just think deeper and think clearer.
Well, like I'll use an example of I have this cabin and there's a river, that's right on the cabin, and there's a pathway. And when I move towards the parasympathetic state, and the parasympathetic state is where we kind of relax and rejuvenate, and it's instrumental for healing and recovery. And so when I walk that trail, especially like last week, it was snowing and I was on snowshoes walking it with two
Mhm.
people from Miami, and they were just blown away, like, because it looked like a winter wonderland. It looked magical. And they got to have this experience that's so unique and different than what they would have every day. And then we got a lot done that day because it clears the mind, almost like when we have ginger to clear the palate or sorbet. It's the
Mhm.
same, like taking those walks often can clear the mind. And when we're in motion, I think that there's a way to absorb certain things and crowd out the noise. So I think it depends on the person, but for me, that was a big deal.
I'm fascinated by this concept of sacred cows that you talk about, and
Yeah,
these almost like fundamental beliefs that we hold as true, and we rarely question them. When in reality, there's a lot of those beliefs that aren't actually reality. Um, what are some of those big sacred cow beliefs that we kind of hold to be true when in reality that might not be the case?
yeah. Like in money, it takes money to make money. That's stuff people say all the time. And yeah, you can make money on your money, but you can make money with relationships and ideas, value and exchange. So it doesn't require money to make money, but people have that belief. So they think, oh, I'm not wealthy enough for X, Y, and Z, and they devalue their worth. Or high risk equals high return. Risk means chance of losing. So how does increasing your chance of losing actually help you win? It doesn't. It just has us be in a level of ignorance and completely kind of engaging in a cycle of destruction, or you're in it for the long haul. Like that's another thing. That's another money concept that has us neglect cash flow. It neglects accountability or measurement if something's working. So those are three of the myths in killing sacred cows. But the biggest myth is people believe in the finite pie. See, like there's only so much to go around, a zero
Mm.
sum game, but that's not real because money can circulate. And if we get money, then that money can be exchanged over and over. And the more exchange that is created, the more wealth is created. So that's that belief in the finite pie gets us to think that, well, I got to hold on to what I've got. I've got to take what I can. But money and pie are not the same thing, right? Even if there was a finite amount of money, they actually add it to computer screens or print it all the time. There's an infinite number of times it can exchange hands, and we use it to buy computers and clothes and food and shelter or entertainment like comedy and concerts. So basically, the more times money exchanges hands, the more value is created. It's only in this scarcity condition of the finite pie where people slow that velocity down, they slow that exchange down, and they start to think very selfishly, which creates scarcity that will limit their wealth. And so this competitive nature ends up, even if people are successful through competition, they're often miserable because they got to out hustle, they got to outwork, they got to outpace, and it's just this kind of relentless treadmill of just trying to get ahead. And so that's unfortunately the pressure that people live under because they buy into this myth of scarcity.
Mm.
And look, even if there's a finite resource, right? There's plenty of finite resources on Earth. Although now they're trying to mine asteroids, which might bring even more resources, right? But there's an infinite number of ways that we can do new things. There's new ways for energy. It used to be that people were riding around on horses, then cars were invented and they were on gasoline. Now we've got batteries and there's solar power. So like there's ways to use human ingenuity and innovation. and and we look at everything from plants, animals, humans, like they keep populating, right? There's seeds, and then more plants grow, and there's animals, and they reproduce. And so even if we're looking at the economic definition of scarcity, that there's a finite amount of resources, there are certain resources that are replenished, and there are other resources that we could just do something different to get the same result. And there's like an economist, Thomas Malthus, from long ago, who had predicted we'd just run out of food and that the world's population, this is like 400 years ago, that it would be done by now. And yet we've had exponential growth in population, and somehow we're still alive. Somehow we're still here. Doesn't mean that there's not major problems and things that need to be addressed, right? With everything from pollution or some people that, we've got a lot of the population that are hungry, but the amount of people hungry today versus 100 years ago is drastically reduced with a higher population. So that is evidence that innovation and ingenuity and value creation and what I'm talking about actually works. Although there's plenty of people that would, disagree because of other examples. But yes, there are still plenty of people that are hungry, but it's like 400%. Like it used to be like 59% of the population. Now it's like 17% of the population. That's
Mhm.
crazy.
I love that concept because um, it reminds me of
And
like
someone should look up real stats on that. I'm guessing that's a pulling out of my
that's all
ass a
right.
little bit. But yeah, yeah,
um, but I love that concept because I think about useful versus true, and like even if there was this scarcity limited number of things, um, it's not as useful to take that mindset as it would be to take the abundance mindset.
yeah,
Almost always, that abundance mindset is going to allow you to start the business, take the risk, do the thing, um, because you're working from a place of it can work versus it probably won't work. Just that change of belief is just so instrumental in like actually doing anything.
yeah, yeah. Totally.
So one thing I wanted to ask you about is right now a lot of my friends are getting out of college and are either getting a 9 to 5 or they really don't want to get a 9 to 5,
Hmm.
but they don't know the business to start. They don't know the thing to do for themselves to not go into that mindless path of a 9 to 5 where they are just working for a Fortune 500 company, blah, blah, blah. They do that for till they're 65 and then retire, but they don't know the path to take to get away from that.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to take daily carving out time to really focus on what they want, to explore and research. And like, it's worth taking the time to like map out and write down, what do you want? What are you looking for? What do you want to create? Not just waiting for it to come to them, but really taking that time. It goes back to the very first thing we talked about, which is writing. I mean, we had this old little cabin and we went and stayed there. And at the end of the trip, I was like, I feel like I was just on a bender. I feel like we just like hung over because it's just small. There's a lot of people there. It's just not enough space. So we just wrote down exactly what we were looking for on the drive home, and then talked to realtors about this is what we're looking for. We eventually found it, but we knew what we were looking for. If you don't know what you're looking for, how are you going to find it? If you don't take time to ask what you want and explore and say, this is what I don't want, this is what I do want, and if we just hope that it's going to happen, that's very fortunate few that might get that.
Yep.
So, what are the things that you want to do? I mean, you're spending all this time in the classroom. What about the time out of the classroom to design your life? So that's the key. And if you go to garrettgunderson.com/rich life, I have a soul purpose activator guide you can have for free. And I would start looking through that to start finding what it is that you want. Go through that guide, answer the questions, because the right questions, if they're asked, will bring the answers from within. But a lot of times we're not asking the right questions or nobody's asking us the questions. So we feel deflated and defeated.
It reminds me of the link to money and happiness that I know you talk about sometimes. Is there's like that correlation up to a certain point? It's like I don't know. You could correct me on this, like $70,000 or something like that, where
Yeah,
money and
back it
happiness is
was about
correlated.
like a decade ago. It was 75
Yeah.
grand. It
Okay.
probably changed, but that
Yeah.
the study was originally that. Mm-hmm.
So with that, to once you get over that hump and you start to get to a point where you're disconnected from the money and the happiness, it's that exact thing, right? That's going to get you to that place of satisfaction. And in your
Purpose,
experience, it's like that
fulfillment,
purpose. Yeah.
yeah, enjoyment, like meaning. Those things, those are gonna be critical because money can't solve all those things by itself. It's very helpful to make you a bit happier, but to sustain happiness, never really designed to do that. And I just know so many people that have made a lot of money and at the same time thought they'd be happier when they got there than they were. And so you can have a lot of money and be happy. You can have a little money and be happy, and you can have a lot of money and be miserable, and you can have a little money and be even more miserable. It's a little bit easier to be miserable when you're broke, right? uh, for sure. So but at the same time, once the basics are handled, there's just not a direct correlation. So where's the direct correlation? It's in, what do you want to do with your life? What things excite you? What things do you enjoy? Like having the time for some play and enjoyment and fun, and also finding work that you're like, hey, most of what I'm doing I enjoy. And I say most because I don't know that anyone just gets to do everything they want all the time. You know, even if you build an amazing empire, you still might have to deal with some employee issues, or you might have to hire or fire, and you might not enjoy doing those things. You might have to be in a meeting that's not always fun. But the reality is, are you doing more of what you want and less of what you don't over time? And are you continue to move that needle in a way that designs the life that you want to live? What do you want your days to look like? What do you want your weeks to look like? How many trips do you want to take? Who do you want to be spending your time with? What types of things do you want to do? These are the questions that nobody else can answer. And unfortunately, a lot of people answer those questions with what they don't want instead of what they do want. So they're
Mm.
consistent about, I don't want to be in debt. I don't want to be in school anymore. I don't want to, well, that's not the path. Fine, that's good for just the beginning, but like, what do you want? And if you can't solve that, no one else can solve it for you. That's the key. That's the key to freedom. Is the key to fulfillment.
It's so funny. I didn't realize how much of this conversation will go back to just ironing out what you want out of life and just spending time with yourself and um, thinking about thinking.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't know that we would talk about that today either, but that's a big part of it.
Yeah,
You
it's
know, and
fascinating.
I just don't. What if someone knew better for the life that you want to live than you did, and they could tell you exactly what to do? I still want to discover, explore, have some adventure. Like, that's kind of the premise of communism. Oh, we know better for you than you know, and we're
Mm.
gonna tell you what to do, and you're gonna, be safe because of it. But people aren't safe and happy. They're forced to do things they don't want to do in order to create that safety, and they find out that feels a lot like enslavement and bondage, not excitement and fulfillment. And so many people are in a world where they get to choose what they want to do. Now, it might disappoint their parents. It might not be the path that someone else sees for them. And then if we have the courage to pursue our own path, we also get the reward of defining that path and having the courage to take that leap of faith on what we really want. Maybe it's
And
not
what?
the most profitable. Maybe it's not the most secure. Who knows?
Yeah. And what are you hoping people get out of the kids book that you just wrote?
Yeah. So it's kind of the message we just talked about, that if you have a certain amount of money, it can make you happier for the basics, but no matter how hard money tries, it can't make you happy. And ultimately, the best investment is in yourself, and that, and get them to think about developing skill sets and not be intimidated by money, and see money as something that they can understand from an early age as a concept. Therefore, it's something that they can master later on in life because they didn't have a bunch of misinformation. So, from them being their best asset, to investing in themselves, to earning, saving, spending, and giving, and getting to a place of abundance so they get past survival and into prosperity. That's the message of the book. And what I know about kids' books is people read them cover to cover. My other books, not everybody reads cover to cover, right? And they might read them more than once. And simple can be very profound, and elegant can be the difference between something actually being implemented in someone's life or something that just stays on the page of a book. So this uses entertainment to educate. I think parents reading it to kids are going to get a lot of value out of it. And I like it because when people are around me and they see it, they can just take a few minutes and read it and get it. So it doesn't mean that you have to sit down and add it to the list, and hopefully you can find time for it. It's just it's right there. And my co-author speaks kids, so she made it super fun, and the
Oh,
illustrator
that's
is
amazing.
phenomenal. So it's I'm really proud of this book.
It's incredible. I mean, I love what you said about the simplicity being oftentimes so profound. It's like I think about uh, what things or what books have had the biggest impact on me, and one in particular was like a Jocko Willink book, Jocko Willink kids book that I just saw on YouTube one time, like the audio version of it, clicked on it and listened to it, and just that
Nice.
profound message and like the simplicity of it. It's like it sticks with you, and there's definitely um, such a beauty in the simplicity.
Yeah, man.
So what's something we haven't talked about today that you think is fundamental? I know there's so many layers of you and your work that we haven't got to yet. What's something that we haven't talked about today that you think is a key thing to harp on?
I mean, I think we're all carrying around some form of pain, and we all make mistakes. And for some people, mistakes they think define them, but I don't think they make you less lovable. They just make you human. And the key is learn from your mistakes versus repeat them. Most people don't make the same mistake twice; they make it like 17, 18 times. Each time it gets a little bit more painful. Stakes get a little bit higher. Like there was a book called Love and Logic I used with my kids. My wife turned me on to it, and it was like give these kids options and choices and let them make mistakes while they're small before
Mm-hmm.
there's too and so like rather than guarding them and helicopter parenting them, so get out there and make some mistakes. That sounds like Vegas's tagline: get out there, make some mistakes. I'm not talking about those kind of mistakes, but just like bet on yourself.
Yep.
Bet on yourself and learn, because if you grow yourself, you'll grow the value that you create. If you grow the value you create, you'll actually have more security over time. It just takes not handing everything over to everyone else and hoping for the best, but like diving in yourself and navigating your way through
Shout out crypto for teaching me that lesson.
it.
That's an interesting topic. I'm curious your thoughts on that. Have you looked into crypto? Like, what is your 2 cents in that world? Because there are so many different opinions and
I,
wildness. It's
I
just a
really
wild
like
west.
Bitcoin. I just like Bitcoin. I like the concept of a deflationary, and a store of value, a finite amount, how it works with the ledger and verifying transactions. It's such a pain using, banks right now. Even wiring money's become more cumbersome over time. And, we don't know what's going to happen with quantitative easing or quantitative tightening and Federal, Reserve changing interest rates. Like to me, it's going to be a wild ride with Bitcoin, but it's something that I believe in. I think it was a gift to humanity. Ethereum is another thing I have quite a bit of. I'm just pretty much in the two big ones. I'm not a shitcoin guy. Like I don't go buy a bunch of like, oh, I hope this goes from 1 cent to 2 cent, and I'm going to double my money. Like and there's a lot of stories in crypto of like, oh, that's what this coin does. But a lot of it early on was just a way for people to pump and dump and kind of
Yeah.
extract money from people. But that doesn't mean that the entire blockchain and ecoverse isn't valid. I think it is valid. It's just what's going to make it to the other side. If we go back and when we were to rewind to the late 90s, who there were so many .com companies coming out and technology companies. Most of them didn't make it, but the ones that did make it, the ones that did, are instrumental in our lives today. And that's what I see is crypto is something that those two coins are. I have another coin, but I only have three coins, but I'm in those at a decent amount. I have a belief in them.
And what do you think the role is going to be in them? Like, what do you think the application or the use case for them is going to be in the future?
I always see like humanitarian efforts with Bitcoin, right? Dropping thumb drives on oppressed people so that they now have a way to get money, because everything, in their government, they shut in North Korea, they could shut down their bank accounts. So there's no way to get like, there's already like, you know, you can basically take money with you in a thumb drive or a wallet. You can transact quickly. You can, like, it's not controlled by some centralized organization like central banks or some government, and that they can change your outcomes with a whim. Now it doesn't mean that regulation can't make a major impact, but to me it just took a minute to make sense, but once it made sense, it made sense. I get that, like, there's been big crazes with NFTs, and then they kind of filter out, but a lot of it's because the early days create a ton of speculation, and then
Mm.
it shakes out, and then it comes back in a new form or in a stronger form where people now have to have a better understanding of what they're getting into and why they're getting into it. It's just the nature of investing. Any new investment that comes out and starts growing, people start throwing money at it, whether they know it's valid or not. So it's one of these things that don't speculate. Like, I'm all about getting economically independent first, getting cash flow from assets to cover your basic expenses. But I like to store some cash above that in Ethereum and in Bitcoin. So uh, I there's a lot of people that could speak about it with more knowledge and and tenacity and everything than I do, but I know enough that I've done well with Bitcoin. I've done I sold really early the first time around, the second and the next time I haven't, so I bought a little bit higher the second time around, a lot higher, but it's done well since then. And I'm not trying to sell it. I'm trying to hold on to it as a store of value.
Yep. How are you thinking about the allocation of your wealth in general, not just in cryptocurrency? Like, if you were to look at it like a pie, how do you think about what to allocate your money in?
You have five categories for me. The big three are intellectual property. I'm creating, I'm creating content all the time. I'm writing a blog like it's 2006. I'm, like I
Hmm.
just like to write. I've got 10 books out there. Um, I'm revamping how I look at courses because I don't think people watch courses. So I'm saying, how do I get people to actually engage with the content? And I'm just giving more and more away for free, just to instead of charging for that kind of stuff, and then just charging for my time at this point, not as much my content other than books. So intellectual property is one of the big ones, and I can license that to other financial people. I can use it to create value for people that I work with. The second one is real estate, but only real estate that I can go to and touch. I used to own a lot of real estate. I don't own a lot now. I own a cabin that I do my one-on-one immersions at. I own a second place I could put a music studio in, and I own my house. I don't. I used to own a lot of rental real estate, but it was a huge pain in the ass, and I didn't love it. So I want places that give me a little bit of inflation protection that I can utilize. And if I would have had to pay the money somewhere else, but now I'm going to be the one to use it, that saves me that money, or at least it's a wash. And then the third category is businesses. So I have a couple businesses, and so intellectual property, real estate, and business. Now the other two categories is I save my money into overfunded cash value insurance, specifically whole life, not index universal life, because I just want stable cash that I could access to get some tax benefit. It's not going to be a home run, but it's going to be a place I know I can count on when I need it. And then a little bit of crypto. So those are the five categories that I really have. I try to keep it simple and not overextend myself. I had over 100 real estate properties at one time. I didn't want to manage that, didn't want to deal with it. So I decided that that wasn't my gig. I believe everybody has an investor DNA. What's your investor DNA? Where do you invest based upon your knowledge and expertise, based upon your values and what drives you? And you focus on those things and you eliminate the rest. And then, focus on cash flow, focus on improving your quality of life over time, like we talked about with Italy and those kind of things. And find time to yourself so you can think about what you truly want.
True. And those one-on-one immersions, what
Yeah.
is that?
So people fly in an afternoon. We go up to my cabin. It's kind of like a lodge. It's a nice, beautiful place. And the first day we just kind of hang out. I get to know who they are, what they really want in life, what's working for them, what's not working. It's pretty casual. But the second day, roll up the sleeves and we go from A to Z. How do they want to design their richest life? That's the question. Where do they need to get their financial house in order so that supports that? What do they need to heal with their belief systems around money that sabotages them? What are the things they want to do less of and do more of? What's the life design that they want? What are the bucket list things that we can have them do in the next year versus 10 years from now? And then what are the five objectives that are going to inform the actions that they take moving forward? We help them kind of find their flow, remove things from their calendar that don't make sense for who they are, develop a story that's consistent with their most powerful version of themselves, and it's a whole hell of a lot of fun. We usually save them a bunch of tax by the end of it. We get really clear about what they're going to improve in their life before the end, and then I make the connections that help make all of it a reality. So it's not just information.
Amazing. Kind of like a holistic money experience, both hitting
Yeah,
that mental of what you want to want, but also making sure you're getting on the financial side of things and making sure everything's organized. That's a beautiful way to
yeah,
do things.
you got it.
Awesome. Well, Garrett, dude, thank you so much for today. This was a wonderful conversation.
Thanks for
I
having
think
me.
I need to spend more time with myself and do some more journaling. But I
All right.
so appreciate
Good.
you, and I appreciate you taking time for doing this today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man. Take
Peace.
care.